Joining us now on the Megacast for our weekly look into the economy and news that will be affecting both your work and your pocketbook as well. Michael Greiner from Oakland University joins us once again on the Megacast. Michael, thanks for being with us today.
Great to be back, Tyler. How are you today?
Doing all right. How are you?
Good, good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you with us as once again, it seems like we're going right back around the spinning wheel again. The Federal Reserve raising interest rates once again by 0.75 percentage point, 0.75%. This is an unprecedented time now, the fourth consecutive raising of federal interest rates. When is this projected to be potentially the last one? We talked the last couple of times and you said this is the second one, we're expecting a third, we're expecting a fourth. Last time around it was the third time, and we talked about this and you said, yeah, expect a fourth, potentially even a fifth. Where is the forecast right now in terms of how many more of these interest rate rises we could be seeing from the Fed?
Well, I hate to say it, but I'm afraid we're probably not done with it. In fact, that's the big message that we got from Chairman Jerome Powell's announcement. In part, what he was doing was reacting to the markets, where there's kind of this exuberance that they get each time that we get close to one of the interest rate announcements. And there's kind of this sense that, oh, maybe things will start to slow down. Maybe there'll be some kind of indication that we're going to have less increases coming forward. But Jerome Powell really threw cold water on that and said very clearly that, stop paying attention to how fast they're increasing. We're going to go up. We're going to keep going up until we start to get control of inflation. He said that, in fact, what we do is we've expected that the terminal rates, the rate that we expect to reach with it has gone up. He didn't say how high it's gone up. He didn't say how they're going to calculate how high it should go. So that kind of leaves a bit of uncertainty again that the markets are going to kind of get nervous about. But by the same token, it made it clear that at least he does not see any end coming in sight anytime soon. Now, this is kind of a disappointment to the markets because, of course, they looked at what happened in Canada, where they slowed down their interest rate increases. And there were also a number of the members of the Fed Board of Governors, as we discussed before, who've been indicating that, hey, we need to be careful about this because we don't want to throw the economy into too big of a recession to deal with inflation. But Jerome Powell was unmoved in that. And he made it very clear to the markets that expect higher rates. And indeed they are. So we'll see what happens with that.
And we had an article on our website, on our local news page earlier on in the week from Bridge, Michigan, that talked about the impact that this raise in the interest rates is having on the housing market, in particular, higher costs. So then they got to lower the cost of the homes in order to make them worthwhile to sell to individuals on the market. Certainly more of a buyer's market. But how is this affecting the labor market? Because as prices increase, cost of living increases, and so then you have a situation where you want to be competitive in the job market and bring in those best candidates, but they're often going to be asking for a lot more money than maybe you've budgeted to pay for those certain positions. So how is that affecting labor at this time?
Yeah, you're right about that. And that's kind of the frustration I think that the Fed has been dealing with, which is, again, this morning, we got more job figures. And once again, they far outstripped what the expectations were. We were expecting about 206,000 jobs added to the economy in October. And as it turns out, we ended up with 261,000. So again, a substantial increase over what expectations were. What's more is that there were some positive signs in terms of the market slowing down a little bit, in terms of the amount, the labor participation rate went down slightly, which is the number of people who are actually in the job market or looking for work. The unemployment rate went up just slightly, which again, you want to see that start to go up a little bit to tame inflation. But the truth of the matter is, what we're still seeing is a very competitive job market where there are many, many more job openings available than there are people looking for work. And what we've seen is, even with some of the tech giants, for example, announcing that they're going to have some layoffs, like, for example, Lyft announced that they're going to have some layoffs. Amazon, who you'd think would be hiring like crazy right now with the holiday season coming right now, has said that they're actually going to have a hiring freeze. And Despite those things, you still see that there are many more jobs out there than people looking, and that really does create upward pressure on wages, which is again what we've seen. So that's kind of the concern that the Fed has, which is long as there is this upward pressure on wages, it makes it harder to get control of inflation, both because on the one hand, people have more money to spend, so they're willing to pay more for the goods and services that they're going to buy, but also then the employers need to spend more to get the workers, and then they want to pass on those costs to the employees. So it ends up being kind of a cycle here that gets hard to get control of.
We're joined by Michael Greiner from Oakland University on today's edition of the Megacast. Of course, you can learn more information about Oakland University programs and their business school by visiting oakland.edu. That's oakland.edu for all of that information. We've talked about recently companies across industries trying to cut costs or at least consolidate some of those costs by joining forces with other companies. That's now affecting the publishing industry. Actually, the court blocked what was a proposed merger um, pardon me, between Simon and Schuster and Penguin Random House recently, and that would have been a $2 billion merger. The argument being out of favor for that merger that it would very negatively affect the leverage that authors would have in those negotiations with these publishers. Tell us about that and what ultimately led to these two publishing giants that are suffering higher costs and certainly the impact of inflation and the market at this time not being allowed to merge, which was something we saw earlier on being a theme with the airline industry.
Yeah, this is actually, I think, going to go down as being a very significant decision in many respects because in the past, the way that courts have looked at mergers has been what's going to be the impact on consumers. And generally speaking, what's been amazing is that most of these mergers, most of the consolidation in these industries has actually, generally speaking, been pretty positive for consumers. Like, take a look, for example, speaking of the book industry at Amazon. Generally speaking, Amazon right now is practically a monopoly in the book selling industry. But yet, for most consumers, we've really benefited from it. There has been lower prices. Who here hasn't ordered something on Amazon and been able to immediately download it or get it delivered that day sometimes from Amazon? I mean, it's wonderful. And generally speaking, people are very happy with some of these larger companies that have really focused on trying to deliver benefits to the consumers. But it has to cut somewhere, though. There has to be some impact that's felt. And the place that's being felt actually is in the sellers of goods and services to those large companies, rather than what's called a monopoly, where you have one large company selling to lots of consumers. What you've got is what's called a monopsony, with one large company buying from lots of sellers, and that's exactly what the judge found in this case, which is that because of the fact that you'd have fewer large publishing companies, which basically this would take us from 5 large publishing companies down to 4, then you'd have a situation where they'd be able to go to the authors and say to them, "Hey, we're not willing to pay so much for your book because there aren't so many people competing over this." And we saw this, for example, with Amazon, where while Amazon has delivered great benefits to the consumers, to people who are sellers to Amazon, it's been really a hardship where they've seen that the money that they're able to make off of Amazon has been severely cut, and it's become much harder for companies to make money by selling through Amazon. And in fact, that's the point that these publishers are making, which is that basically they're dealing with this monopoly with Amazon, who's saying to the publishers, "Hey, we're not going to pay this much money for the books that you're selling." And a couple times where some of the publishers have tried to rebel against it, Amazon has so much market power that they've been able to prevail and basically push down the costs that they're paying to these publishers. So as a result of it, the publishers are saying, "Look, we need to be able to create a level playing field here where we're able to essentially bargain on equal basis with Amazon." But yet, by the same token, what that does is creates a situation kind of downstream then for the authors who are saying, well, then it creates a situation where we don't have any bargaining power. And so that's kind of the vicious cycle, I think, that the antitrust enforcers have been trying to deal with. And this, frankly, has been a priority, I think, for the Biden administration. President Biden has raised this a number of times. There have been calls for this, including by many economists for quite some time, that really there's this concern with this increase in consolidation we have in the American economy, that what it does is it leads to less dynamism in the economy, less innovation, less investment, less exciting new things happening. And there's actually been evidence that in our economy, with fewer job starts, for example, leading up to the pandemic, less new businesses starting up. And so as a result of that, there's definitely this move to try to address it. But the problem is that we've kind of created so much consolidation already that each of these arguments for consolidation seem to make a lot of sense. Like the publishers, they've got a good argument. Hey, we're trying to deal with Amazon, but yet the excuse me, the authors are saying, hey, we need to stop this. And at some point, it just has to stop and kind of start to be undone. And so I actually applaud the judge on this. We'll see if this ruling stands, because again, this typically has not been the approach that the courts have taken to addressing antitrust cases. But it may not matter anyway, because as it turns out, there's a deadline for Penguin Random House to finalize this deal, and they're coming up on that deadline. And as a result of that, even though they've said they're going to appeal, it might not matter because it may get them past the deadline anyway. So I guess we'll see what happens with that. But I think that it's a very strong signal that maybe there's a slight change that's starting to happen now in the courts, where they're starting to consider the fact that these consolidated industries have resulted in sellers really being hurt, not just consumers.
We're joined by Michael Greiner, Assistant Professor of Management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration, on today's edition of the Megacast. More program information from Oakland University and School of Business Administration can be found at oakland.edu. That's oakland.edu for all of Oakland's programs and more information from the university. Michael, lastly, we've heard so much over the last several months with inflation, with the state of the market, especially about the rise in gas prices. Gas prices are significantly higher. They keep going up. They keep going up. Now we're hearing that they're going back down, but they're still almost $1, and in some places well over $1 over where they were priced a year ago. That being said, oil companies across the board are making record profits. And this week, President Biden came out arguing for some counteraction against that in the form of a windfall profits tax and tax. We also know that the United Kingdom considering similar actions against the oil companies. Tell us about A, what's the motivation behind that strategy from the government? And B, if that is to be the case and that is to be enacted against these companies, how could it affect regular Michiganders at the pump?
Great question, and I think the first answer to the part of your question about what's behind it is, I think it's politics. I was just reading an article the other day about how the chief of staff to the president right now is obsessed with the price of gas, and it's the first thing that he checks every day. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that President Biden's favorability rating is tied almost directly to the gas prices, which seems kind of ironic given the fact that the reality is the federal government actually has relatively little control over the price of gas. The price of gas is set on a global market where basically you've got a certain amount of oil that is available, you've got a certain amount of oil that's demanded, and there's kind of this market where you have the buyers and sellers negotiating to figure out how much they're going to pay for it. And it's purely based upon economics 101 principles of supply and demand. Well, as it turns out, we have relatively high demand because we've been coming out of the pandemic and people are driving again. So that's increased demand. At the same time, as supply has come down for a couple of reasons. You have number one, the fact that we have this war going on in Ukraine, and Russia, of course, is a major supplier of oil, although not necessarily a big supplier of oil to the United States or to the UK for that matter, but they are a supplier to the world. And again, it's a global market where, oil prices here in the United States are based as much upon what's going on in India or China as they're based upon what's going on here in the United States. So you can't look at it just within that context. Now, the oil companies make the point, and they're quite right about this, that they have very little control of oil prices. And as a result, they shouldn't be penalized for the fact that they're making a lot of money now. Because back during the recession that we had as a result of the COVID pandemic, when everybody stopped driving and oil prices basically dropped through the floor, they lost a lot of money. And that's the second reason right now that we have lower supply, which is that here in the United States, a lot of the oil companies took a bath during the pandemic, losing literally billions of dollars. And a lot of the smaller oil companies actually went out of business as a result of that. There's a lot of argument in some of these congressional races about fracking and should it be done. Well, the reality is there's not a lot of fracking going on anyway because of the fact that so many of these frackers lost their shirts during the pandemic, so they don't want to invest in that again. Now, the concern that I think is legitimate here, though, with the oil companies is that if they're making profits, they should be reinvesting then in trying to create more exploration or invest in new alternative technologies or do something with the money that's going to benefit the economy overall in terms of our energy future. And saw a great example of this with Shell, which just announced a massive profit of $9.5 billion. That's double what it earned in the same quarter last year. Unbelievably, though, it's actually down from what they earned the prior quarter, just giving you an idea of how much money they're making right now as a result of these higher oil prices. But at the same time, what are they going to do with this money? Are they going to invest it in new drilling and new exploration and new pipelines? No. What they're going to do is that they're basically going to give it to their shareholders in the form of dividends and in the form of stock buybacks. Now, obviously, I'm all about encouraging investment, and it's great that shareholders are being treated well. But that I think is really what sticks in the craw of a lot of people when they see that these companies are making so much money, and there is this kind of reduction in supply out there. And yet they're not doing anything to address supply when they could be doing something with all this money that they're making. And instead, they're basically just returning money to the shareholders. So I would rather see personally, rather than something that's a tax on windfall profits, I would rather see something that addresses more the longer term issue that we've seen here in the United States about all the money that's spent on stock buybacks. And in fact, there are some proposals out there to try to address that, because that's one way that I think companies have really been able to drive their stock prices higher without investing in anything meaningful that actually helps the economy. And I think the more that we can shift businesses to actually investing in meaningful investments, that would be something that would benefit our economy quite a bit in the long run.
Something's happening in the market. We'll certainly be hearing a lot about it from Michael Greiner each and every Friday here on the Megacast. Michael, thank you for joining us again.
Great to be here. Have a great weekend, Tyler.